Amara was in her little tailoring shop in Kawanda City, arranging fabrics and pouring herself a cup of tea, when her phone rang. The moment she heard the trembling voice on the other end, her whole body froze. "Amara, your father." "Chief Obinna," he collapsed. They rushed him to the hospital. For a second the room spun. Her hands shook so badly that the cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Her father was more than a parent. He was her anchor, her teacher, her only source of strength since her mother's death years ago. She had leaned on his wisdom for every decision, big or small, and now the thought of losing him felt like the ground was being pulled away beneath her feet. Tears blurred her eyes as she grabbed her shawl and ran out of the shop, her heart racing like it wanted to escape her chest. Every memory of him teaching her how to be brave, how to hold her head high in a world that often tried to break her, rushed back like a storm. In that moment nothing else mattered. Not her work, not her customers, not the city buzzing around her. All she wanted was to reach him before it was too late. Amara's legs carried her faster than she thought possible, her slippers slapping against the dusty streets of Kawanda City. She pushed through the crowd, her chest burning, her throat dry, yet she didn't stop. Tears clouded her vision, but all she could see in her mind was her father's face, his strong, reassuring smile, his voice telling her, "No matter how heavy life feels, Amara, you must keep walking." Those words kept echoing as her heart pounded louder with every step. People turned to look at her, but she didn't care. Vendors were shouting, children were laughing, cars honked, but to Amara the world had gone silent. Only the sound of her father's name in her head pushed her forward. She stumbled once, almost falling, but she caught herself and kept running. Her lungs ached, but her spirit refused to stop. She remembered how her father had held her hand on her first day at school, how he had stood by her during her mother's burial, whispering that everything would be all right even when she didn't believe it. Now the thought of losing him tore through her like a blade. When the tall white walls of Nduru General Hospital finally came into sight, relief and terror hit her all at once. She pushed through the gates breathless, her face wet with tears, her heart begging heaven for mercy. The smell of medicine and disinfectant filled her nose as she ran inside. The cold, polished floors of the hospital felt strange under her tired feet. She saw doctors rushing, nurses moving quickly, families huddled in corners praying for their loved ones. She whispered to herself, "Please God, let me not be too late. Please keep him alive for me." Amara's shaking hands clutched her chest as she asked the nurse at the desk where her father was. Every second felt like an eternity. As she was led down the long corridor, her knees almost gave way. All she wanted was to see him breathing, to hold his hand one more time. Amara stepped quietly into the dim hospital room, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might break through her chest. The sight before her stole the breath from her lungs. Her father, the strong and fearless Chief Obinna who had always been her pillar, lay motionless on the bed. Tubes ran across his body, machines beeped faintly beside him, and the smell of medicine filled the air. His once powerful hands, the same hands that had lifted her as a child and guided her through life, now lay weak and cold on the white sheets. Amara's eyes flooded with tears as she moved closer, whispering his name, praying he would answer. The doctors at the corner spoke in hushed tones, their words cutting into her like knives. They said he might not survive the night, that his body was too weak, that the sun might rise without him. Amara shook her head, refusing to believe them. How could the man who had always been so full of life, so full of wisdom, now be lying there between life and death? She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly, as if her touch alone could call him back. His skin was cold, and the chill traveled straight into her heart. Memories crashed over her in waves, him laughing under the mango tree at home, him advising her about patience and strength, him telling her that she was his pride. Now all she could do was sit by his side, her tears soaking into the bedsheet as she begged silently, "Please, Papa, don't leave me. I still need you. I am not ready for this." The room was heavy with sorrow, the sound of her sobs mixing with the steady beeping of the machines. To Amara, the world outside no longer existed. All that mattered was the fragile life of the man lying before her, the man who had been her everything. And as she clutched his cold hand, she felt the cruel weight of grief pressing down on her, threatening to break her completely. The waiting hall of Nduru General Hospital was filled with a heavy silence broken only by muffled sobs and the shuffle of restless feet. Relatives had come from every corner of Kawanda, some rushing in with tears streaming down their faces, others sitting quietly with their heads bowed. A few clung to each other for comfort, while others stood apart, whispering in hushed tones. The air was thick, not just with grief but with tension. Everyone knew Chief Obinna was a respected man, but he also had enemies, inside and outside the family. No one dared to speak it out loud, yet the fear was written on every face. Amara watched as her uncles argued quietly in the corner, their voices sharp but low. Her father's cousins, who hadn't visited in years, now sat close together, whispering as though guarding secrets. Even in a moment of tragedy, the old rivalries had found a way to surface. Some cried genuinely, their pain raw and visible, while others seemed to wear their grief like a mask, stealing glances at each other instead of focusing on the man who lay fighting for his life in the next room. The younger children played on the floor, too innocent to understand the storm brewing around them, while the elders prayed loudly, their voices shaking as they begged heaven to spare Chief Obinna's life. Every time a doctor walked past, the whole hall would freeze, eyes following anxiously, hearts holding their breath. Amara sat quietly near the wall, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She felt their eyes on her, some filled with pity, others with suspicion. It was as if everyone was waiting for the outcome, waiting for answers, waiting for someone to break the silence. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them this was not the time for old grudges or hidden whispers, but her voice failed her. Deep inside, she knew her father's sickness was more than just fate. Something darker lingered in the room, something no one wanted to say out loud. The night felt endless, every second stretching like an hour. The hospital room was silent except for the soft humming of machines and the occasional footsteps of nurses passing by. Amara never left her father's side. She sat in the hard plastic chair, her back aching, her eyes swollen from crying, but she refused to move. She held his hand tightly, whispering prayers into the silence, hoping somehow her voice would reach wherever his spirit was wandering. The air in the room was heavy, almost suffocating, filled with sorrow and fear. Every rise and fall of his chest was like a fragile thread holding her heart together. She leaned closer, watching him, afraid that if she looked away for even a moment, he would slip away forever. Outside the window, the night sky slowly shifted, stars fading as the first signs of dawn touched the horizon. But inside, time stood still. Her relatives dozed in the waiting hall, but Amara's eyes stayed fixed on her father. She remembered how he used to stay awake by her sickbed when she was a child, refusing to sleep until she was well. Now it was her turn to keep watch, her turn to fight sleep, her turn to stay strong for him. Just before dawn, when the sky turned pale gray, a faint sound broke the stillness. The heart monitor beeped gently, then steadied. Amara's head shot up. Her father's eyelids fluttered, so faint it could have been her imagination. She gasped, leaning in, her heart thundering inside her chest. "Papa," she whispered, her voice trembling. His fingers twitched weakly beneath her hand. For the first time in hours, hope flickered inside her like a fragile flame. Something was happening. Something she couldn't explain. The silence that had weighed on her all night shifted, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Amara leaned closer, her ear almost touching her father's lips. His breathing was shallow, each inhale sounding like a battle. She could see the pain written on his face, his chest struggling to rise and fall. For a moment, she thought he was only moving out of weakness, but then his lips trembled and a faint sound escaped. Amara's heart skipped. She held her breath, desperate to catch every word. Slowly, painfully, Chief Obinna whispered a single name. The voice was weak, broken, but clear enough for her to hear. Amara's eyes widened. Her whole body froze as the name echoed in her mind. It was not a stranger. It was not an enemy from outside. It was someone close, too close. Her mouth went dry, her hands turned cold, and for a moment she thought she had misheard. But when she looked into his eyes, she knew he meant every word. Her father had gathered the last of his strength not to say goodbye, but to leave her the truth, the secret he could not take to the grave. Her tears spilled uncontrollably as she shook her head in disbelief. "No, Papa, it can't be," she whispered, her voice breaking. This was someone she trusted, someone who sat in the waiting hall pretending to grieve, someone who had always been part of the family's life. Betrayal stabbed her deeper than grief. It was as if her heart had been split into two, the pain of losing her father and the shock of knowing who wanted him gone. Obinna's hand twitched weakly in hers, as if pleading with her to remember, to act, to carry this burden. His lips stopped moving, his eyes closing slowly, but the weight of that whisper remained heavy on her chest. Amara's entire world shifted in that single moment. Nothing would ever be the same again. She knew one thing with certainty. Her father's last words had given her a mission, and it was more dangerous than anything she had ever faced. Amara sat frozen in her chair, her father's final whisper still ringing in her ears like a curse. Her blood felt like ice running through her veins. She wanted to scream, to cry out so the whole hospital could hear what he had said, but no sound came from her lips. It was as though the truth had stolen her voice. She gripped the edge of the bed, her knuckles turning white, her body trembling. How could it be possible? How could the person her father named, the one she had laughed with, eaten with, trusted for years, be the same person who wanted him dead? Her mind refused to accept it. She shook her head again and again, whispering, No, it can't be true. Papa must have been weak. Maybe he didn't know what he was saying. But deep inside, she knew Obinna was not a man to speak without meaning. Even at death's door, he had used his final strength to tell her something she could never ignore. That truth was now hers to carry, whether she was ready or not. The betrayal burned through her chest like fire. Every memory she had with that person suddenly felt poisoned. Every smile, every word, every embrace now seemed fake. Amara's tears blurred her vision, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She looked toward the door of the hospital room, knowing the very person her father had named was out there among the relatives, pretending to grieve, pretending to be innocent. Her lips parted, but again no words came. She wanted to shout the name, to expose them right there, but fear gripped her. If she spoke too soon without proof, they would call her a liar, a girl blinded by grief. And if the killer discovered she knew the truth, what would stop them from coming after her too? The silence pressed down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. Amara sat there, trembling, caught between the unbearable pain of loss and the cruel sting of betrayal. Amara felt her father's hand grow weaker in hers, his breaths coming slower, each one more fragile than the last. She leaned closer, desperate to hold on to him, whispering his name over and over, as if calling him would keep him alive. But then, with one long heavy sigh, his chest sank deeply and did not rise again. The steady beeping of the machine turned into a single flat sound that pierced the room like a knife. Amara's body stiffened, her eyes widened in disbelief. No, not yet. Please, not yet. Within seconds the room filled with cries. Nurses rushed in, relatives pushed through the door, some screaming his name, others collapsing to the floor. Wails echoed down the hospital corridor, mixing with prayers and desperate pleas. But Amara couldn't move. She sat frozen, still holding his lifeless hand, her heart refusing to accept what her eyes had just seen. Chief Obinna, the strong man who had raised her, guided her, and carried the family's honor, was gone. But more than the grief, it was the weight of his last whisper that held her like chains. He hadn't left her with comfort or a blessing. He had left her with a truth so dangerous, it could destroy everything. The name he gave her wasn't just a clue, it was a weapon. A weapon that, if revealed, could set the entire family on fire. As relatives wept and clung to each other, Amara sat silently, her tears streaming down her face, but her mind far away. While everyone around her mourned openly, she carried a different kind of pain, one that she could not share. Her father's death had torn her world apart, but his final words had placed a burden on her shoulders heavier than grief itself. She knew the secret could not stay hidden forever, but revealing it would mean facing storms she wasn't sure she could survive. Amara stepped out of the hospital room like a shadow, her legs shaking so badly she thought they might give way beneath her. The hallway was filled with relatives crying, some holding each other, some sitting on the floor in despair. She moved past them quietly, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders, her eyes blank. On the outside she looked like another grieving daughter, but inside her heart was screaming. She carried something no one else knew, a secret so heavy it pressed on her chest with every breath. Her father's last whisper repeated in her head again and again, the name echoing louder than the sobs around her. She wanted to cry out and expose the truth, to point at the killer pretending to mourn among the family. But then a sharp thought struck her. If she revealed it now without proof, they might turn against her. They might call her mad with grief, accuse her of lying, or worse, the person her father named might strike again to silence her. Amara leaned against the wall, her tears dripping silently onto the cold tiles. She felt alone even in a hall full of people. Every face looked suspicious now. Every tear, every whisper, every hug seemed fake. Who could she trust? Who would believe her? The weight of the secret burned in her chest like fire. She wanted to scream just to release the pressure, but she bit her lips until they bled. Her father had trusted her with his final truth, and she couldn't fail him. That meant she had to be wise, patient, and strong, just as he had always taught her. Taking a deep breath, Amara made a silent decision. She would not speak, not yet. First, she needed proof. First, she needed to uncover the lies, the betrayal, the hidden truth behind her father's death. Because if she spoke too soon, she wouldn't just lose her father. She might lose her own life too. Amara sat quietly among her relatives, her eyes scanning every face, every movement. On the surface, the hall was full of grief, people crying, comforting each other, wiping tears from their eyes. But to her, everything looked different now. She no longer saw family, she saw suspects. The name her father had whispered replayed in her head like a haunting song she could not escape. And the worst part? The person he named was right there, sitting only a few steps away, weeping and pretending to share in the pain. Her stomach twisted as she watched them hug relatives, their face soaked in tears that looked almost too perfect, too rehearsed. Were those tears real? Or were they part of a mask? Amara clenched her fists, her heart pounding so hard she thought someone might hear it. She wanted to point a finger, to scream, "I know it was you." But instead, she bit her tongue and kept quiet, her eyes never leaving them. Every laugh from the cousins sounded fake to her now. Every whisper between the uncles made her suspicious. Every hand placed on her shoulder felt heavy, like it carried hidden intentions. She was drowning in doubt, trapped in a hall filled with people she could no longer trust. The more she watched, the more unbearable the tension grew inside her. It was like carrying a bomb in her chest, knowing it could explode at any moment. When her gaze returned to the person her father had named, Amara's heart filled with rage and confusion. How could someone so close, someone so loved, plot something so evil? She lowered her eyes quickly, afraid they might see the truth in her stare. She knew she had to be careful. One wrong move, one careless word, and they would know she was aware of the secret. And if that happened, her father's killer wouldn't stop until she was silenced too. Days after the funeral, Amara sat alone in her father's study, the room still carrying his scent of old books and tobacco. The house was quiet, but her heart was loud with questions. She opened his wooden chest, the one he always kept locked, her hands trembling as she searched through his belongings. At first it was ordinary, clothes neatly folded, family photos carefully kept. But then her fingers touched a bundle of envelopes tied with an old string. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the words inside cut through her like fresh wounds. Letter after letter revealed things she never imagined about her father's world. Deals made in secret, arguments over land, accusations of money stolen, and threats that hinted at danger. Some letters were from business partners who turned bitter, others from relatives who felt cheated, their words filled with envy and anger. The deeper she read, the more she realized that her father had been surrounded not only by respect but also by greed. He had enemies, and some of them were not strangers, they were family. Then she found a document tucked inside a leather folder. Her heart skipped as she read the names and signatures. It was proof of betrayal, a deal signed behind her father's back by the very person he had whispered to her in his final moments. Amara's hands shook so badly she almost dropped the paper. Her father had known. He had discovered the truth before it destroyed him, and with his last breath, he had passed that truth to her. Tears blurred her vision as she pressed the letters to her chest. The puzzle pieces were slowly fitting together, and the picture they formed was darker than she ever imagined. This wasn't just about sickness. It wasn't fate. It was betrayal, carefully hidden behind smiles and handshakes. And now that truth was in her hands. Amara knew she could not stay silent anymore. Her father's whisper was no longer just a memory. It was a call for justice. Amara sat on the edge of her bed. The letters spread out before her like pieces of broken glass. Each word cut into her deeper, reminding her of the truth she wished she could ignore. The person her father had named was not just anyone. They were powerful, feared, and connected. People obeyed them, respected them, even bowed before them. But behind the mask of honor was a ruthless heart, one capable of destroying anyone who stood in the way. And now Amara knew too much. Her chest tightened as she thought about it. If they discovered she held these letters, if they even suspected she knew what her father had whispered, her life would be worth nothing. They would silence her the way they silenced him. The thought made her blood run cold. Every creak of the house at night made her jump. Every shadow outside her window made her heart race. She no longer felt safe even in her own home. But another fear grew stronger than death itself, the fear of betraying her father's final words. He had trusted her with his last breath to carry the truth. To stay silent now would mean she had failed him, that his whisper had died in vain. The weight of that thought was heavier than chains. Amara pressed her palms to her face, tears slipping through her fingers. She was trapped between two fires. One wrong move could cost her life, yet doing nothing would burn her from within. She thought about her father's eyes, the way they pleaded with her in those last moments, and she felt a spark of courage push through her fear. She knew this was no longer just grief, it was a dangerous game. A game of secrets, power, and survival. And whether she was ready or not, she was already a player. The only choice left was to decide if she would play to hide, or play to win. Amara moved through her days like a shadow, carrying a secret heavier than any burden she had ever known. She confided in no one, not her aunts, not her cousins, not even her childhood friends. The truth of her father's final words and the letter she had found burned in her chest like a coal, hot and relentless, refusing to cool. Each heartbeat reminded her of the danger she was in, and every breath reminded her of the responsibility she carried. Even those she had once trusted now seemed uncertain. Her closest cousins who had grown up with her, laughing and sharing stories under the mango tree, now felt like strangers. Their smiles seemed sharper, their questions too pointed, their laughter too loud. Every glance felt loaded with suspicion, and she found herself wondering whether they too had hidden motives. Who could she really trust in a house full of grief and deceit? The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety. At night she lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, imagining every possible way the truth could come crashing down. She thought about her father, his eyes weak but determined in those final moments, and how he had chosen her to carry this knowledge. That thought gave her strength, but it also deepened her loneliness. There was no one to share the burden with, no one to help her plan her next move. She was completely alone, and the isolation made the danger feel even more real. By day she moved carefully, smiling when she had to, speaking when necessary, pretending to be just another grieving daughter. But inside she was always alert, always calculating. Every conversation, every movement, every whispered word around her could be hiding a threat. She was fighting a battle no one else could see. A battle for truth, justice, and survival. And though it was lonely, she knew it was a battle she had to fight and win, because her father had entrusted her with it, and failing him was not an op. That evening the house was quiet, almost too quiet. Shadows stretched across the walls as Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She had followed the whispers, the subtle movements, and the hidden signs for weeks, and now she was certain. The person her father had named was right there, in the living room, pretending to sip tea while the sun dipped behind the hills. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her hands trembling but her eyes fixed on them. "I know what you did," she said, her voice low but steady. For a moment nothing happened. Then slowly a smile spread across their face. It wasn't a smile of regret or fear. It was a smile of triumph, cold and calculating. Amara's stomach twisted. This was the face of someone who had no conscience, someone who had laughed while her father suffered, someone who had thought they could hide behind lies and grief. They laughed then, a low chilling sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "You're clever, girl," they said. "But clever won't save you. You should have stayed quiet. Now you might end up like him." The words hit her like a slap. The same man who had smiled at family dinners, who had given advice and comfort, now threatened her life without hesitation. Amara's eyes burned with a mixture of fear and rage. She wanted to scream, to strike, to run, but she stayed rooted to the spot. The weight of the letters, the secret, and her father's final whisper pressed down on her chest. She realized then that this confrontation was not just about fear. It was about courage, about standing up even when the odds were deadly. "I will not be silent," she said, her voice stronger now. "I will make sure the world knows the truth." The killer's smile faltered just a fraction, but they quickly recovered, leaning back in their chair, still dangerous, still ruthless. Amara knew this was only the beginning. The path ahead would be dark, filled with threats and lies, but for the first time, she felt a spark of. Amara's tears had dried, but the pain in her chest had turned into something fiercer, fire burning with purpose. Her father's last whisper echoed in her mind, no longer just words, but a command she could not ignore. Every memory of him, every lesson he had taught her, every moment of love and guidance now fueled her determination. She would not let his death be in vain. That night, under the pale light of the moon, she packed a small bag, taking only what she needed. Her heart raced, not with fear this time but with resolve. She thought about the killer, the person who had smiled while her father suffered, the one who had hidden behind lies and family loyalty. They would not escape justice. Every plan, every secret document, every clue she had uncovered would be used to expose them. She would make sure the world saw the truth, and that they could no longer hide behind their mask. As she stepped out into the night, the city around her seemed both dangerous and alive, full of shadows and whispers. But Amara felt ready. The journey ahead would be long, treacherous, and filled with threats. Yet she welcomed it. She was no longer just a grieving daughter. She was a fighter, a daughter carrying her father's final message, a warrior armed with truth. With each step into the darkness, she promised herself that she would stop at nothing to bring justice. Her father's secret would not die with him. She would fight, expose the lies, and make the killer pay. No matter the cost, she would see this through to the end.